I'm Tracy Austin, your host of the People Strategy Podcast. This show provides interviews with organizational leaders and ongoing coaching experiences that highlight elevating people in organizations through a people strategy roadmap.
One of the big components of change management is how are you going to impact your business partners or your guests or your customers, and realizing that this is going to be a busy time for us and we are not going to make any changes to ensure our business partners, our guests, our customers are able to get, the full experience without any interruptions. That is a factor and very important into change management.
Welcome to the People Strategy Podcast. My name is Tracy Austin, and I'm your host. We are wrapping up our 8-week series on leadership development, and I have Adam Gruszcynski with me again from Potawatomi Casino Hotel. So, Adam, welcome back.
Thanks, Tracy. Glad to be back for the 8th and final installment of the series.
And we've got perfect timing to chat about change management, as this one will drop on December 30th. There's lots of changes that are definitely happening as we have a change in the White House. And for all of our HR leaders, we know that that leads to lots of fun things that happen. But for, our leaders in business, as the business climate changes, a lot of things also change. So with that, I'm excited to chat about this as we reflect on 2024 and kind of look to the future of 2025.
Yeah, it's funny. You're talking about all the changes that are occurring and will be occurring after the new year. And here at Potawatomi Casino Hotel in the IT department, we actually have a change freeze. So it's ironic we're talking about change management. And here, where I work, we're not making changes because we're entering one of the busiest seasons for the organization as a whole. And as an IT, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot and make a change and blow up and impact the guest experience when we're going to be busier. So we're kind of trying to hold the line and not make as many changes, but still excited to talk about change management nonetheless.
Well, and that's something that is such an important point, is when we plan for change management, understanding what else is on folks' plate.
Yep.
So that the change that we're implementing truly can take effect. And essentially, having a change freeze ensures that we're not going to do any changes right now because we know we have to focus on the customer experience. Yet, we will go back to changes once this critical period is through.
Right. And I guess I didn't really think of it that way until I just heard you say it, that by implementing a change freeze, one of the big components of change management is how are you going to impact your business partners or your guests or your customers, and realizing that this is going to be a busy time for us and we are not going to make any changes to ensure our business partners, our guests, our customers are able to get, the full experience without any interruptions. That is a factor and very important into change management.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So one of the key things of change management that, I always love to take a pause before we move into making a change is, what is the highlight of the things that have gone well so far? So if you think about 2024, what's one thing that's popped up that you're like, this was amazing on our team?
I think from an IT standpoint, it spreads out past the IT department and it encompassed the entire organization. But we built an outdoor concert venue in 6 weeks and held, 4 concerts over the summer, with the biggest one being we had Snoop Dogg. I knew nothing about building concerts and what, from a technology standpoint, all that goes into it. But, we had a great vision from our CEO here who had this picture, and we were able to come together as a organization and multiple business units working together to make this a reality. And I learned a boatload along the way, as well as the other team members of the IT department. And we were able to make this a really successful thing here. So that was, a lot of change and change management occurred during that whole process. One of the foundations of change management is communication. And that was on full display because, working with so many different departments and so many moving parts, you have to have great communication, or else you're going to run into, multiple issues, problems that can easily be avoided if you just communicate. And we did a really great job of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And highlighting those things that have gone really, really well allow you to pay attention to that throughout the very specific change processes. So love that specific piece to it. And as we dive into change management, there's two really powerful change management episodes that we will include in the show notes. And this was a joint strategic partner episode with John from Willory and HR Like a Boss, along with Katie, who talks about the changes that they implemented inside the bank. And you're laughing because I know you listened to that episode as well.
Yes. And I just love that. I'm still trying to incorporate IT like a boss here, but I haven't found the right way to sneak it in yet. So.
Oh my gosh, I love it, right? Mm-hmm. Don't you love just the little pieces that you can take and go, okay, how do we do this? Because that's all different changes. So, amazing. So let's dig in and, chat a little bit more about this. So when you think about change management, I'm curious, what does that mean to you, Adam?
I really think, the single purpose of change management is being able to prepare users for something that will be different in their day-to-day lives as it relates in my world to technology and how they use technology, and making sure that they're aware of what that means to them. So being able to communicate, we are doing this, for this specific reason, and it will affect you in this way, whether a system might be unavailable for a specific period of time on a specific day, or we're going to be performing an upgrade and you're going to get advanced functionality, or we're just implementing something new that you never used here before, and this is what it's going to do. Just being able to communicate that to the end user is significantly important. And then also making sure you're not making multiple changes on top of each other, so that if something were to go wrong, you're not having like an avalanche or a waterfall of problems that you might not necessarily be able to pinpoint the root cause, because there are so many moving parts that if you communicate, a date and time, you make sure nothing else has happened on that date or time, just to prevent that specific situation of, well, we've made multiple changes, we don't know what the one change is that caused the problem. We can prevent that, not shoot ourselves in the foot, and have, maintenance windows or, a maintenance calendar that says on these days and times, this is when we can make those changes to kind of prevent that from happening.
Yeah, so it's isolating the different changes and following that all the way through. And it's kind of ensuring you've got a strong project management system as well. And if you go back and listen to those two episodes, you'll hear the project management piece of that becomes really important, because project management includes a ton of communication.
It does. Should be project communicator.
For sure. So, and of course, we're the People Strategy Podcast. So, when we look at, as leaders, implementing change is a key part of leadership. And so when you think about, we'll just talk about the concert venues, that you talked about, which was a huge change to what your day-to-day IT was. What were some of those leadership skills or traits that you implemented to have that be successful?
Personally, I think one of them was having trust in my management staff, to know what they're good at and what they're experts at, and let them go wild, because I can't be involved in every single thing just because there's so many moving parts. So having that trust, between the managers that would attend meetings that I couldn't attend to know that IT was represented well, whatever the crux or the moving part that IT was responsible for or needed to be aware of was going to be handled appropriately without actually being involved. I mean, that was a big thing to the success of our project and in completing it, because no one can be everywhere at the same time, and being able to delegate and trust that delegation is going to occur and be successful and get done what needs to be done. I mean, that doesn't happen overnight. That takes time. So being able to have that really, really made this successful, because then you can kind of start, once you have that trust and delegation, tackling multiple things at multiple times, because you can send someone, to work on a specific segment at the same time of working on another thing. And it just kind of spirals down to make the project just move more efficiently, more effectively, and get things done faster. As we've mentioned before on this specific podcast and previous, is communication. Building a concert venue isn't just an IT problem. It involved multiple departments here, our facilities team, our security team. We did work with a contractor. So, being able to communicate with all the different people involved to make sure that timelines were being met, or things that weren't planned for or thought of that did present a roadblock got communicated, so everybody was aware that either something needed to be changed so that we could get around this roadblock, or what do we need to do? Do we need to have a quick meeting to figure out how to get past this problem as a group together, brainstorm, come up with a solution, and then move that problem out of the way to be able to continue to make the deadlines that we had. So communication was also a huge thing. Plus, then from a technology standpoint, all the technology that we're not used to having, because we don't have an outdoor venue. Who do we go to, to provide that? So again, relying on my management team to trust, to know what they need to do to work with it, relationships they have with vendors to figure out how to solve problems, just goes back to that whole trust thing again.
Absolutely. And it also sounds like it's really tapping into who the right person is for the job, because you've got very specific folks with very specific expertise and experience and connections. And so it's not just handing it to anyone, but really knowing who on the team has the ability to take this to the next level that also provides the growth for them to do that.
Right. And that's kind of, a superpower of leadership that we've talked about, is being able to identify the right people on your team that are right for the specific task at hand at that moment, which, a good leader can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, and I know that you and I have chatted about the book list from this podcast specifically. One of the Brave New Work by Aaron Dignan is one that I love, and really the rules of change. There's times where we can start small with change, and there's times where it goes big. Yours was big pretty fast. But really watching that change spread, especially when we're implementing change inside of our organization, which is technology change. Sometimes a lot of times we'll isolate that to one specific department to try it out and make sure that it's working and work the bugs out before we roll it throughout everyone.
Yeah, we joke here. We have a group called the Friends of IT that, are really good at testing stuff for us and are okay if things don't go well, and are a little forgiving. So yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Is this where you start to implement IT like a boss?
Maybe.
With the Friends of IT?
Maybe. Yeah.
Because then guess what? The watch it spread portion of this is they start talking about how this saved them so much time or energy or whatnot. One that we're seeing a lot right now is like the implementation of things like Copilot and AI inside of different departments, and what that looks like for those to spread, especially when there's fear around something that it's new. It's all right. Yes, we need the policies. Yes, we need the training, and then kind of rolling that out.
Yeah,
so
the fear of unknown.
Small,
the fear of unknown until you know it, and then it's not so scary, and then you're off and running with it. Yep.
Right. And that fear of unknown really gets us into the third step of kind of that rules of change, and that's start by stopping. So when we stop and say, okay, if we don't do anything, what's the impact? And what we don't know, if we educate and start taking these as little experiments, and I love using little experiments, because experiments don't feel scary, where if we put a performance appraisal item next to it, now it feels scary because now it has to be perfect, right?
Right. And I would even argue with the start by stopping approach, in change management and in just leadership, you're going to be in situations where you're going to encounter problems or things that aren't going well. And you're talking with coworkers, and then those problems just start snowballing because, well, if we don't do this, it will cause this problem, which will then cause this problem. And, an easy way to do that is just to stop that conversation and be like, all right, we're getting our skis out, underneath our feet. Let's focus on the original problem first and address that. And then we can tackle anything else that may come after that. But who knows, if we fix the problem, maybe all those other things you're hypothetically thinking about won't even be a problem. You're just in your own head. So let's just stop, talk through the problem, and then see what happens afterwards. And we can, regroup, reassess, and go from there after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to the fourth one, which is join the resistance. So what are all the things? We're not
talking about Star Wars either.
No, we're not. That never crossed my mind, which is why I love these conversations, because it's what's obvious to you is not to me. So,
Sure.
but that joining the resistance of really, what are all the reasons somebody would not want to do this? What are all of the fears around it? And what are all the complaints around it? So we've done a podcast on here about called turning complaints into requests, right? Like, what are all the complaints? When we join the resistance, we're able to hear all the complaints to really understand what are the requests that allow us to move it forward.
Right. And, join the resistance might be better recognized to some people as put yourself in the other person's shoes, which,
100%.
From a technology standpoint, really, not until we got our CIO here did I start really doing that. I just knew what the change was going to be, and I knew it wasn't going to be a big deal. But just because I'm familiar with it or I understand the technology behind it, the people who either are using the technology or experiencing the change, it might look like big, magical powers are at play, and it's scary, and maybe they don't want to adapt to it. That if you put if you put yourself in the shoes of the other person and kind of start to think that way, you might be able to time back to change management, create like an implementation plan, or have documentation that explains things better, or communication that goes out ahead of time that says, this is what we're doing. We think these are going to be pain points you might experience. This is how you can avoid them or get around them. And by just, joining the resistance or putting yourself in the other people's shoes, can help make the change much more manageable and have a greater adoption rate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then people feel heard.
Correct.
And it's a great way to increase the communication, which is what we talked about, previously. One thing that I think is really important when we're doing change management is that while we're implementing changes, individuals' day-to-day jobs does not disappear.
Correct.
And so often what we see, especially what we chat about with the leaders in our leadership development program, is how do we create those conversations throughout the change management process to ensure that the day-to-day work does not fall off and people truly feel seen and heard for what they're doing and the concerns that they have throughout it. Because it typically is an increase in workload for a period, and then it drops off, and the change has a positive impact on the individual's ability to work and be productive. Yet throughout that period of time, it typically increases it.
Correct. And sometimes, while you're assigned work for a project, but still have to keep the lights running, keeping the lights running might, cause you to start and stop the project work multiple times throughout the day, where you can never actually get a good amount of momentum to make significant headway on the project. And that itself is its own problem. And there are, a few ways to tackle that, depending on your team dynamic, your organization. You might have somebody who is solely focused on this project only, and everyone else on the team is just making sure the day-to-day is running smoothly, dealing with issues that may pop up. And then, when the next project comes up, it kind of just rotates, where the person who was doing the project work now goes to go, do the day-to-day, and someone else could do the project work. That's one way to tackle it. Or just, as we've talked about in previous times, previous podcasts, calendar blocking, schedule specific time on your calendar that's just dedicated to working on projects, so that you can at least try to get some significant uninterrupted time to make good headway to get the project completed.
The People Strategy Podcast is sponsored by the Leadership Development Program offered through Elevated Talent Consulting. Do you have folks in your organization that have just been promoted from the doer to the leader? Well, we have a program specifically for you that trains on the specific ways for an individual to be a leader versus to be the doer of all of the things. In this program, we partner with learners to experience and create their own leadership around time management, delegation, coaching, accountability, and change management. Head to the link at the bottom of this page to find out more and sign up.
That was a recap of kind of rules of change. Start small, watch for it to spread, start by stopping and, put yourself in that other person's shoes with that really strong communication and paying attention to the workload impacts of that. So as we look at change cycles, I'd mentioned, labeling things as experiments, knowing that it's not going to work perfectly. And if we can set strong expectations up front to know that, you've got your friends of IT that does that. What other ways or what other things have you noticed within change cycles that's allowed change to be successful?
Personally here, I think there's two types of changes. There's changes that are driven by the IT department that need to occur, and no one, unless you're in IT, would know that change happens. It's behind the curtain. The regular end user, the guest, the business partner won't even know there's a thing happening, but it's required. It's part of infrastructure just to make the organization continue to move forward. And then there's those changes that either impact the guest experience or the ability for the business unit to interact with the guest that, has more interaction with the customer. And those types of interactions get in your business unit, your partner within the organization to be on board. And at the beginning stages of the changes just makes that process go so much smoother and gives the success rate of that project significantly more weight to be completed successfully. That if the person requests this change and you're the one who's going to be working on it, if you include them at the beginning of, all right, here's what you're asking for. Right now I expect it to be completed by this date. And on this date, we'll have enough for you to start testing and experimenting with to see if it is actually going the way you want, or the changes are affecting what you think it should be affecting without detrimentally affecting or breaking something else. Getting them buy-in and having them contribute to the success of the project will just make the project that much more successful. Because I've heard of times where, an IT department is involved in a project and they're now waiting on the business unit either to do testing or validation or to start using the project. And if you get them involved in the beginning, those types of issues of waiting for your partner to work with you, just get eliminated.
Absolutely. And you just did an amazing job of really talking about how you lead change as that change leader, right? Which is to clarify that vision up front and enroll them in it with the communication. And a lot of times this is where the project management comes in with, the timelines, what's there, the testing period, et cetera.
Sure.
And so one of the things that I think often happens with change when it's implemented is we're paying attention to the direct folks that we're working with and not the global or organization-wide impact of change. So when you think about that, we'll just go back to your example of these concerts that you did last summer, knowing that your team now is tasked with something that's pretty significant. How did you ensure that the day-to-day still happened across all levels, knowing that your department specifically had, this increased task that was all new and different?
Yeah, I really have to give kudos to my IT leadership team here, because they were able to identify that, yes, this is this big project that we need to move forward, but we still have other projects that are maybe smaller in scope, and to keep the lights on and put out any fires of things that may break up, that they were able to delegate and manage their teams to be able to say, all right, today you need to do XYZ because we need to keep this project moving and we can't move forward until this gets done. So it doesn't matter. You're doing this while the other two, you keep everything else going, keep the lights running, put out any fires. If the help desk needs any assistance, you're the ones going to go help them to allow this person to focus on that team. And I really have to give praise to my leadership team that they were able to do that, because they just knew that's what needed to be done. Now, to be fair, they knew that's what needed to be done because for the past 2.5 years we've been nothing but a construction site and have renovated and remodeled multiple sections. So we were just going in phases. So this was really kind of like the third phase we've done. So a lot of that was by trial and error in the past of knowing what needs to be done and being able to dedicate resources just to keep the project moving. So they had a lot of practice.
Yeah. And that really brings up the importance of a debrief process after every project, is really debriefing that. What went well? What didn't go well? Did we hit our intention of the project? Who do we need to show appreciation and gratitude for? What would we do differently within that? Because that allows us to build that into the next project and the next project, even though they're not exactly the same. Right. And that's something huge within change management, is that awareness of what we've done in the past to ensure that we're taking the good things out and then, doing some of the incremental changes with the things that, didn't work to move forward for the future.
Correct. And you mentioned, giving praise to those who helped make the project a success. Please keep in mind, leaders who are listening, that it's not just the people who are actually working on the project. It's the people keeping the lights on and the fires out and moving other things forward too. Because if you don't have that involvement, the people working specifically on the project can't do that. So it's a big picture thank you. Whereas, it's really an entire team, not just specific individuals, that should get that accolade.
Right. Because you've got folks picking up the slack, so to say,
Correct.
because we have shifted resources to another area, which means
Yep.
there's a hole that has to be filled.
Correct.
Absolutely. So one of the things that comes up, when we've talked a lot about accountability, we did a whole session specifically on accountability, the how much of what by when, and, all the
Mhm.
fun things within that episode. So if you haven't listened to that one, it's 4 behind this one, I believe. But one of the key pieces within change management is that we still ensure that we have strong accountabilities for the day-to-day, which we've talked a lot about, and the current project. So what are some things, Adam, from that leadership perspective that are important within accountability through a change process?
Sure. Typically, organizations have some form of change management tool to help them document and plan all the changes that are occurring. I cannot stress how important it is enough to have those, whatever system you're using. Usually a ticket has an ability to put details of what the actual change is, what's the benefit, what's the ROI, what's your implementation plan, what's your backup plan, is there testing involved? If so, what's the testing? How are you communicating that? Keeping that up to date ensures success of moving the project forward. Specifically, if I tell somebody, all right, hey, go work on this project, but it's not updated, and they go to the place where it's supposed to be updated, how do they know what to do unless that's updated? And having a tool that keeps track of that for you is only as good as the information you put into it. So if you're not regularly, routinely updating the change ticket or the change plan with information, you're doing yourself, your team, your organization a disservice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And that goes into the transparency as well as to what's
Yep.
working, what's not working. And sometimes we have to change what the deadlines are and the expectations if they
Right.
weren't set up accurately or other things come into play within that.
Right. And I think another thing that I know we talk about communication and how important communication is, but in change management, communicating is important, which we've established. But there's different types of communication that I will say is successful and not successful. If you are going to be making a change that is going to impact the whole organization, and you only give them, less than 24 hours notification, you're kind of causing a difficult situation for your business partners because you're not giving them adequate enough time for them to adjust appropriately to be able to handle the change or the outage or the maintenance window for the staff, the situation that they have, where you should really be giving them significantly adequate notice, at least a week out, and then a reminder a couple of days before, and then a reminder the day before to make sure that they have had enough time to be able to plan accordingly how the change will affect them when it's either being implemented, rolled out, whatever. That, just because you sent an email a couple hours before doesn't mean it's necessarily great communication.
Right.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, as we start to wrap up this change management episode and our, 8-week leadership development series, what insights have you taken?
I think, you know, communication, I mean, through and through, I think we talked about how successful communication makes every facet of leadership in every episode we talked about. And there's different layers, different methods of communication, from a leadership perspective, who your direct reports are. Are you communicating clearly and effectively to them, not only what you need to be done, but in a way that they can understand and process it to allow them to be successful? From change management, notifying your business partners of a change in an adequately appropriate amount of time. There's just many facets of communication that the more you can communicate, and sometimes over communication is a good thing, the more successful you're going to be as a leader.
Absolutely. And so if you're curious about, the leadership development program, we have several sections of this starting in January, we'll be doing one in Milwaukee in February, along with some virtual sessions of that. So if you are interested in that, you can find more information in the show notes on that. And with that, Adam, it has been phenomenal having these conversations with you and digging deeper into this and your experience and how that's worked. I always love connecting that so our listeners can put themselves in those specific shoes.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. This has been a lot of fun, Tracy. And I would agree, I tend to learn better when there's actual real world examples to go with whatever the topic of education is. So I hope the listeners were able to find some nugget of information that you and I talked about, very helpful.
Amazing. And have a fantastic new year. And in January, we will be chatting all about different AI and technology and how that impacts human resources. Adam's like, great, fun. This is fun.
That sounds fun. Yeah. Have a happy new year. Take care. Be good.
Thank you so much for listening today. I'd love to connect with you. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at Tracy, TRACI Austin, and at our website at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. If you'd love to learn more about our process, please reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for listening and sharing your feedback with us through a review. Have a fantastic day.